So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. Then we find a layer of understanding of the 61st chapter, related then with the spring feast, the first section of the chapter, then the autumn feast, and also the return of the holy cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. So let's try to understand then what went on a few months ago, so then we can understand then the events and the sequences then become very true. Some time ago we were very concerned with North Korea and their bombs and the bomb sites and so on and so forth. Today, got in the news, they have even retrieved from their posting positions. So obviously, we were so concerned with the situation over there and nothing has taken place. The sites are being evacuated then, bombs are being stored away, and then whatsoever we were so sensationalizing in the past did not take place. Obviously, because you are finding then an Asian country near to China, and they would never release any kind of atomic bomb. Not only this then, but we find ourselves then not preparing for then the system coming in the future. We must understand, after 2009 there is a separation of what they thought was then politics mixed with religion and trade. Those must be absolutely defined. That's why then we have then in the internet then freight and trade at the same time. So there are many countries around the world. Some of them are big countries, some of them are not big countries. But then islands of the Pacific, for instance, used to live in the Pacific for quite some time, kind of a bit familiar with the culture and so on and so forth. But then, is anybody out there teaching those locals and then the islanders how to deal with the computer? How to set up PayPal on their computers, how to read emails, how to receive and sending funding? It is extremely important teaching those people and making computers available so then they can become part of the market very shortly coming in the future. So let's say, for instance, they have the natural resources of their own, or fish, or some sort of a natural resource of their particulars in their islands. It is very imperative the whole group of people of the island coming up and do a work at the port, then come up with a port of their own, some ships or some boats, where they can start producing their own parcels. Set up emails for them, teaching them how to read emails, how to send money. For instance, there is a ship or then a boat of their own, they can maintain themselves, and then they start up a freighting company. Then they load up those parcels in the ship, and then they take over to the other island, where is then a larger island. And then when they get the parcels over there, then they receive payment via computer. So somebody in these chain of islands must go around and teach them how to use the computer. It is the utmost importance. Not only this, but big governments then should spend time in analyzing then the viability of having underwater cables or then broadband optical cables linking up the islands. So then they can prepare themselves for what's coming, because when they receive their funding, they can be directly doing trade with China, and they can receive other parcels from other parts of the world. So then they can become more acquainted of what's coming, because it's not very fair the rest of the world then modernizing and upgrading themselves, and then nobody's taking the time to teach the islanders. They're not going to become slaves of the future, are they? Probably not. But if they don't have the knowledge, then they're always going to be dependent upon somebody else. Whereas if some families, they come together, they purchase a computer, they can play with it and being acquainted with it. It's extremely important because not only they help themselves, but then they can do overseas purchase. Absolutely sure at some point a standard freighting company such as, for instance, FedEx or UPS or some other company, they are going to start going over there at some point with boats. And it's going to increase a whole lot more because of the normal situation regarding retailing. Retailing then, it's not the same as we used to know. If you do a research in the computer, you find the retailers complaining because of lack of customers, because people are purchasing online. This generates a whole lot more volume of parcels, but then must upgrade themselves also. Make sure there is a port over there. If there is no funding to work on the port, gather the neighbors over there and fix it up, so they can be prepared for what's coming. So from the instructions we find then, and the returning of the cities of the Messiah, then we understand it's the land of Sudan. That's where then the first holy city of the second tabernacle services period restoration then starts in the land of Cush, or then northern Sudan. The rest then it's simply understanding then trade. That's why then this time of modern trade requires then a computer. So there are countries, for instance, such as Papua New Guinea, for instance, in the very northern side. They could start up a program of their very own. They have discovered minerals under the sea, and then starting upgrading their broadband, as New Zealand is doing very wisely. As far as deliveries and pickup, you know, a person can come up with a cart drawn by, you know, animal or something, then go to the port, and then they come and they get their parcels. Then they receive payment online, so they can learn how to, you know, check over there to PayPal, got email over there, and receiving funding. It's extremely important, otherwise they're going to get caught up in the future, and then some scoundrel are going to come around and they try to monopolize the entire island's flow of parcels. So rather than always having a centralized place, they can become more acquainted with it. So then we find the news related with the North Koreans. Then they are, you know, retrieving, thank God, let's be grateful for it, so they can be obviously at some point then joining up with China and becoming part of the Asia market. Because like it or not, the Asia market, it must expand. Not only through the Pacific, but then worldwide. But there is a problem. The West is coming against them. So they must manage their time properly and wisely, because at some point China is going to hire the Northern Kingdom's services as managers. That's when then tensions must then start, and then the Cold War returns. So then China must then expand its services and its borders as far as trade-wise speaking, and making sure then islanders are then available with computers, with ways of receiving parcels, sending parcels, receiving payments via email, so they can start doing their own trade. If every person doing trade in a computer, then they name a person at least to get the maintenance going. Maintenance of the port, maintenance of the roads. Those people receiving from PayPal, for instance, via their emails, they can also send their 10% or any kind of a percentage they think of, then goes to a place where then they can maintain the port or the boats or whatsoever is required. But they must start learning it. It doesn't have to be a very fancy computer, a very standard CPU, standard monitor. And you can start learning how to do it. Then they get the hang of it, and then they teach the other neighbor. And then the other neighbor also gets a computer. And if he doesn't get a computer, goes to the neighbor, and then they work together. So it becomes interesting because then they can manage themselves rather than always trying to find a centralized place, and there are always scoundrels in those centralized places. They are always liars. But when they do themselves, then they send the funding of their very own, then they can maintain a record of what was given. Then when a person over there is not doing the job properly, then they can place somebody else because they have the record. And then when the islanders, they come together, they say, I gave this, you gave this, so it's this much total, how come the job wasn't done? Then you find a scoundrel over there, go swim out of the island, hoping that a shark would come around and bite his rear. So there are areas of the trade yet being upgraded very fastly, but then people must educate themselves. In every area of a computer they must start being acquainted with it, and thus far it's very friendly usage. The main point is the distance from their islands and then another island where they can start doing trade amongst themselves, always via computer. Yes, they can do cash also, but cash is becoming not the means of exchange. If there is not electricity, they must try to find a way of having electricity on the island, at least a generator. Or certain hours of the day they can turn on the computers and then receive the signal and do payments amongst themselves. And they become acquainted with it, because that's what the world then is heading towards. But if they are not taught properly, when those modern times truly come, then they are going to be used as cheap labor or slavery, or civilized slavery. So preventing this situation, then somebody over there from those islands must come around and teach them how to use computers. Because the modern world is not very friendly. If they think the new age of trade via computer is friendly, it is friendly usage. But when people don't know how to do themselves, it's absolutely slavery. It's a civilized slavery. That's why the middleman must be gone and people must start doing their own trade so they can control their own expenses. They know how much they are spending. For instance, once a month, once every 10 days, they come together in a centralized place and they talk, we gave this much as a group. How come this project wasn't done? Then the person over there has to give some answers. So they receive the control over the situation. So big islands, for instance, Australia or then New Zealand, those islands of New Zealand, they must start, coming together and verify what they can do for the islanders over there. Because it's not only sending ships over there with rice. They must be educated with the new system coming. They have natural resources. If they dig around over there, they find minerals. But let them make their own price. So then this is what then the future is presenting itself. Always computerized. You find then areas of investment, for instance, then the broadband being upgraded, more transactions, more earnings. Then later, when the Chinese system becomes available, they start learning how to invest their money, how they receive their money, how to read those items, those products, how to invest in those products, how to wait for their earnings. That's where the world is heading towards. And China is the largest in the planet as far as transactions in computer trade. That's why then the Asian market is very prominent in the Pacific. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.